In this chapter, we'll focus on non-declarative memory. Non-declarative or skill memory can be distinguished from declarative memory in a variety of ways. So first off, as we discussed last week, with non-declarative or skill memories, they may be difficult to verbalize flexibly. And in fact, we may only be able to demonstrate skill memories rather than verbalize or tell someone about this particular memory. We'll also talk about how skill memories are acquired in this chapter through repetition or practice. Amnesia patients allow us to see the disassociation or distinction between declarative and non-declarative memory. We see this with anterograde amnesia, which is the inability to form new memories. The memory disruptions observed in anterograde amnesia seem to be limited to declarative memory. The first evidence of this comes from a neurologist in 1911. Kleppert, and I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but bear with me, he treated Korsakoff patients. Korsakoff syndrome is a memory disorder primarily due to alcoholism, or more specifically, a vitamin B1 deficiency due to excessive alcohol use. When Kleppert met his patient, in this case, our patient has anterograde amnesia due to Korsakoff syndrome. When Kleppert first met the patient, he taped a pin to the inside of his palm so that when he shook hands with the patient, it pierced the patient's skin, right, with the pin. Now, when the patient and Kleppert met for a second time, the patient claimed he had no memory of the doctor and ever having met him, but still he refused to shake his hand, even though he couldn't clearly indicate why he was refusing to shake the doctor's hand. We also see that with repeated practice, skill memory improves, as evidenced by skill performance. And this is true for normal healthy controls and for individuals who suffer from anterograde amnesia. We can see this with the mirror tracing task, in which in this particular task, you have your hand and the image that is being traced is covered and hidden from sight, but you can see the image that you're attempting to trace and your hand reflected in a mirror. And so we have mirror tracing as our skill here. And with practice, people get better at this particular task. And the same is true for healthy controls and for our patients with anterograde amnesia. The only difference being that those who suffer from anterograde amnesia believe that each session that they practice is the first time that they've ever done this task before. And so we see this disassociation or this distinction between the declarative and the non-declarative memory, right? The declarative memory being, oh, hey, I've done this before. I've done this task in previous sessions. And the non-declarative being the improvement in the actual skill performance or the actual performance of the mirror tracing task in this particular example. So read in your book about implicit learning. So we believe that skill learning is a type of implicit learning. And so read about the serial reaction time test in your textbook. This is similar to our mirror tracing example. Non-declarative memories can include perceptual motor skills or cognitive skills. So perceptual motor skills would include more physical tasks focused on muscle movements, something like riding a bike, for example, whereas cognitive skills would include more mental or intellectual tasks, things like reading or math. Although strict distinctions may be difficult, since we know that many tasks likely involve a physical and a cognitive component. Many sports, for instance, require cognitive strategy and physical balance, flexibility, and or strength. So your book talks about the Tower of Hanoi, and I included a link in your notes if you want to test out this particular game and kind of test or practice your cognitive skills. So as we've said, practice should improve performance in both perceptual motor tasks and in cognitive tasks. So as much as my stats students may hate it, the more analyses that they do, the better they'll get at statistics. But in general, we see a predictable pattern when examining the effects of practice on performance. Initially, we see very rapid gains, but eventually improvements start to level off, as we see in our curve here to the right. However, we can observe variations in the speed of improvements and the durability of learning due to varied practice methods. And so we can examine what is the most effective or efficient practice or training techniques to improve perceptual motor and cognitive skills. So one thing that may be important in maximizing practice is prompt and frequent feedback. Of course, we can imagine that if we don't know what we're doing wrong, or maybe if we don't even know that we're doing anything wrong, then repeated practice could just be kind of further ingraining incorrect strategies. We're just repeatedly doing this task incorrectly, then what function is practice serving? And so in fact, Thorndike in 1927 gave some participants feedback and other participants did not receive feedback. And Thorndike found that only that group that received feedback improved with practice. And so here we see evidence that feedback may be essential to reap the benefits of repeated training or practice. Another thing that we can look at is massed versus spaced practice or learning here. And now this may contradict the strategy that many of you guys use for the development of cognitive skills or the development of knowledge. And so I know that a lot of people engage in massed learning or study sessions. So essentially you have an exam the next day, and so you wait until the night before the exam and attempt to spend all night cramming for that exam. And the research suggests that this may not be the most effective and efficient strategy to use. I do understand that at times it may be the only strategy that is available to you if you did not have the time or the opportunity to learn prior to that evening. Then some learning or study is better than nothing, but you could use that same amount of time much more efficiently. And so the research suggests that, let's say you spend 6 hours studying the night before the exam in massed study, or here we'll kind of look at massed practice. If you spent 6 hours practicing a particular skill all at one time, right? That may not be as effective as splitting that 6 hours up into smaller increments that are distributed or spaced over time. So for instance, studying 1 hour a day for 6 days, or 2 hours a day for 3 days. Or here, if we're looking at practicing, spacing out those practice sessions rather than practicing for 6 hours straight, practicing 1 hour a day for 6 days. would be a more effective use of time. So spaced practice and spaced learning seems to be much more effective. So you're using the same amount of time, that 6 hours, you're just using it more effectively in terms of improving skill performance, or when it comes to your studying, learning the material. We can also look at constant versus variable practice. So we have our two different scenarios here. Constant practice, you are practicing kind of the same discrete movement or skill over and over again. So playing one scale here, the G major scale 20 times, versus variable practice. Here you have a kind of more flexible strategy. You are practicing several different kind of discrete skills simultaneously. So playing multiple scales 5 times each rather than the same one 20 times. So the question is, well, which one of these is going to be more effective or more efficient? And the research suggests that variable practice is often more effective. That here with our participants, those who used a variable practice strategy seem to perform better after training than those using a constant practice strategy. So kind of mixing it up, engaging in this variable practice technique may be more effective in improving your skills overall. I think about with this, if you've taken a cognitive or particularly a developmental class, you may have talked about individuals who are bilingual or multilingual. And from a developmental perspective, for many years, it was recommended to not attempt to immerse young children in multiple languages simultaneously. The reason for this was that these children were showing evidence of delayed verbal acquisition. But later research came in and suggested that even though they may show delayed language development, that when they do develop language, their learning curve is much steeper, and so they catch up to monolingual children very quickly. So they may show initially a delayed acquisition, but they're catching up very rapidly, and that they show evidence of kind of more sophisticated verbal skills. And then, of course, they have multiple languages rather than just one, which, of course, is a more desirable skill set. So I kind of think of this versus, the constant versus variable practice, that with a monolingual child, we have constant practice of a single language. With our bilingual or multilingual children, it's more variable, switching back and forth between multiple languages. And that ultimately the research is suggesting that this variable language practice seems to be more effective. Now, there are cases when constant practice is desirable. And so it may be kind of skill or goal dependent, which is the most optimal strategy for you, depending upon what your learning goals are.